The scripture that I am reading is about fear and faith. I hope each one of you will listen to it with your own ears and also with your own heart to discover how this speaks to you personally. Immediately, he, Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead onto the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately held out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
We will now have our music for preparation, found in your New Century Hymnal on page 514. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear singing in the air. Over my head, I hear singing in the air. Over my head, I hear singing in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I see trouble in the air. Over my head, I see trouble in the air. Over my head, I see trouble in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I see Jesus in the air. Over my head, I see Jesus in the air. Over my head, I see Jesus in the air. There must be a God somewhere.
musical training in my background made me listen to that song and realize how different it would sound if you just sang it, there must be God somewhere, rather than there must be a God somewhere. Can't you feel the difference? We've got to do more singing in here.
Yeah,
Yes,
I agree.
we'll talk.
Yes, ma'am. Sang on.
How many of you, like me, have spent most of your life living near the water, in particular the ocean? Yeah. Lake Superior, where else? Lake Michigan. Mississippi River, okay. Pacific Ocean. Long Island Sound. I grew up on Long Island. But the ocean, of course, I got to quite frequently too. I bet, like me, many of you find yourself irresistibly drawn to the ocean in all its many personalities. Walking along the beach is so inspiring. It's downright mesmerizing. I sense eternity, an awareness of something so much greater than I. That is truly awesome. And I imagine many of you can feel exactly how that feels. I also love to watch children who dig moats for their castles as close as possible to the water's edge, just daring the surf to come in and wash them away. I once saw my friend's son with his feet in the water. Now, this is just a toddler, but he was loving it. He had his feet in the water at the ocean's edge. Of course, his father was holding on to him. And he shrieked with delight every time the water splashed up against him, totally oblivious at that moment of the strength of the waves, which his father kept lifting him above just at the last minute. The child was fearless. In his father's hands, he wasn't afraid of what might happen to him. In some ways, I envy that child. You? As we grow up, our trust erodes. How hard it is sometimes to feel now in our present ages that all is right with the world, that God is indeed in God's heaven. Each morning we wake up to so much news about what is going wrong, all that might go wrong also. We protect ourselves. Yeah, seatbelts are a very good idea, but we do much more than that. We double lock our doors. We just fear so much that we build all sorts of walls. And some of us carry guns. And then there's the danger of nature's behavior. Wildfires, earthquakes, floods, and the ongoing worries, our health, our children's well-being, the state of our finances, the state of the world. With terrorism and injustice far away and close to home, helplessness and doubt rear their ugly heads, and we find ourselves facing fear. There is no end to this list of what worries us and what we are truly afraid of us. And we might want to say, God, just make it all right. That's what Job thought should happen. Job, who went through so much pain and so much suffering, couldn't figure out why God couldn't make it right. And we have to be reminded that the Creator is even more powerful than we are, and a little bit wiser, infinitely wiser, and has a broader picture of where we're going and how things in life will actually play out. Job was a blameless man with great integrity, and yet he was so filled with suffering that he protested to God about the unfairness of it all, questioning God's wisdom. And you know what God's answer was? Where were you when I laid the foundation? of Earth. Tell me if you have understanding. Makes final sense of life's experiences? This is where our faith comes into play. Our faith, believing when we don't fully understand. Sometimes we worry when we need to accept. A geologist was once lecturing at Harvard about the expanding universe, and he pointed out that there are galaxies greater than our Milky Way speeding outward. That means they're moving away from us so fast, and we're losing them. They're falling off the edge of the universe, so to speak. That seems mind-boggling for those of us who don't really understand that much about what goes on way out there. After the lecture, one very anxious woman asked, "Professor, what are we going to do about all of those galaxies we're losing?" To which the professor quietly replied, "Let them go, madam. Let them go." You know, there's a wonderful prayer that starts off, "God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change." Now that takes faith. When life feels out of control, we can still feel serenity. But it comes not from knowing everything will work out our way, but that the future is in God's hands and everything will be what it should become. It is faith and not fear, which allows us to let go of what we know is out of our control. It is faith and not fear that allows us to experience joy, laughter, wonder, peace. It is our faith, not fear, that enables us to really enjoy all the gifts of life. Fear paralyzes. In the storm, the panic about our boat sinking might keep us from paddling. A church can be paralyzed too by the fear that they have when they struggle with who will we be in the future. Just as ocean waves keep changing shape, so does the future. And it tests our faith to face the changes. The way we do church and the way we are church may have to change. In fact, I think it will. Now, that may scare some of you. However, God takes part in that change. Jesus reaches out a hand that says, "I've got you." And in faith, you will discover new ways to continue ministering as God would have you minister. What about the fear of what might happen? I've seen a little bit of that recently, just reading several days ago about the oncoming storm down south, and there's no question. We have to be ready for things that we need to be ready for. But sometimes I think it gets overdone, and we find ourselves preparing for something that was very unlikely to happen. You know, if Peter had thought about what might happen, he never would have stepped out of the boat. But he got past his initial shock at seeing someone walking on water, on troubled water at that. And he recognized and trusted his friend, Jesus, who said, "Come on." And at Jesus' invitation, Peter climbs over the side of the boat and he took a step. Then he looked around him at where he was, at the threat of the waves lapping up and threatening to drown him, and fear rose in him and he began to sink. You know, to take a step is always to take a risk. To do anything is to take a risk. Jesus' whole life was a risk. befriending the poor, the sick, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, and to be a rebel and troublemaker in the eyes of the powers that be, because he revealed God in a way that couldn't be ignored, but some people couldn't accept it. Do our lives reveal God in a way that can't be ignored? Are we able to stand up to what is right, even in the face of resistance? In a racist environment, do we speak and act like anti-racists? In homophobic settings, do we model God's inclusive love? Do we reach out and care for those ignored, even despised by others? Jesus calls us to do that. God says, come to me. I'm already here. William Sloane Coffin, whom I had the honor of taking a class with at PSR, got to put that in there, was born in 1924 and was a prominent Presbyterian minister who definitely took risks. He was a Yale University chaplain when he took part in the 1967 Boston protest against the Vietnamese War. Coffin heard God's call and was willing to walk on a dangerous, uncertain path. He not only spoke out against war, but aided young men who chose to avoid the draft. The result, he was put on trial and found guilty for his actions. Fortunately, the verdict was overturned, and he was spared the 5 years in prison that he would have faced. Sometimes we take chances that put us in that much danger. So what happens to Peter when his first success at putting a foot at least touching the water, when that success morphs into failure? Still, a hand reaches out to him. Maybe the response to failure is even more important than being able to walk on water. None of us really needs to walk on water. But we desperately need to know that when we can't, God will catch us. Again, William Sloane Coffin said, "I love the recklessness of faith. First you leap, and then you grow wings." He knew what he was talking about because he bravely put his faith into action. You and I will be caught by the hand of God if we live our faith. You and I can take God-inspired risks and know the love, safety, and assurance of Christ, as did Peter. So how do we avoid this doubt that we often have? Well, throughout his life, Peter had his moments when he sure couldn't live up to his calling to be a disciple. He even denied ever knowing Jesus the night Jesus was betrayed. You and I are as human as Peter. Consider the meaning of the word doubt. It comes from a Greek word, distazo, which means hesitate, or be confused, be uncertain. I think we have all been there. And considering the meaning of the word, it's not a sin, it's just human. But we don't stay there. We don't have to stay in that feeling of doubt. We can move forward. Just like Peter, we are all faltering followers, sometimes confused and uncertain. But God does not give up on us. It might be at the height of success, even, that you have a feeling of doubt. Sometimes the most successful people think, how the heck did I get here? and that actually causes them to doubt. Our faith is not just challenged in the valley, but also on the mountaintop. Peter had prevailed through a rough night on the seas, but yet he doubted in the morning, even with Jesus in his sight. Maybe Peter's hesitation was due to the sudden intellectual awareness of what he was doing, trying to walk on water. You see, obeying God does not mean ignoring human reasoning. Rather, in our faith, we humbly admit that we do not have all the answers. We cannot do all things. Our faith acknowledges that God is God and we are not. When you and I are overcome by fear, we can pray as Jesus did. God, save me. Sometimes that is the most powerful prayer you can pray. And when you say those words, God save me, hold out your hand that it may be grasped by the saving hand of God's love. Amen.
And our music response will be found in